In this video, we're going to be looking at strengthening the most important muscle in your entire body. That's right, we're going to be strengthening the diaphragm, and I'm going to explain why we want to be working on the strength of not just our diaphragm, but the whole inhalation, exhalation, breathing dynamics, which is going to involve the intercostals as well. And I'm going to show you a nice little progression of exercises you can do at home, lying down on the floor, that's going to improve the strength of your diaphragm and all of those breathing muscles that are going to help improve your performance and how you manage your breathing, particularly at higher intensity sports and exercise. Firstly, let's locate your diaphragm. Your diaphragm is situated underneath and attaches to the bottom of the rib cage, and you can find and locate on yourself where your two lowest ribs meet, and they make an angle up to the sternum that should be roughly at rest about 90 degrees, the angle those two make. When we breathe in, those ribs are supposed to widen, the diaphragm's supposed to move down and flatten out, and we're going to feel an expansion through the belly area as the diaphragm moves down, but the rib cage expanding as well. Your ability for the ribs to move and the strength of your diaphragm to move down and create pressure is an important part of breathing, and the diaphragm being the key muscle to help us draw air into the lowest portion of the lungs. That's where we have the greatest density of alveoli. That's where the most amount of oxygen sits due to gravity. If we're breathing into the upper chest with shallow vertical breathing mechanics, when we're starting to get out of breath and our breathing being challenged, then it's not efficient in terms of where the oxygen needs to get to in order to get into your blood and ultimately into your tissues to help create energy. So it's really important that we are aware of where the diaphragm is, how the diaphragm and the rib cage interplay together, and why that's important rather than breathing up here. In terms of why we should be strengthening our diaphragm, before I show you the progressions, all the other muscles in the body, they all get trained. Our abs, they're trained for exhalation. They're trained when we do our sit-ups and our core work and everything. You know, all the other muscles within our body, we're training the strength of them. The diaphragm is on the inside, and the diaphragm is the foundational muscle for not just your breathing, but also your deep core stabilizing musculature. So the diaphragm plays a role in stabilizing your midline. It's connected not just to the rib cage, but to your spine. So your diaphragm does a role to stabilize that lumbar spine, and the pressure it creates when you breathe correctly with these dynamics and mechanics that I'm going to show you help to create intra-abdominal pressure, which helps you with force transfer, whether that's when you're running and playing sports, transferring force through your body, transferring force into the ground and back through. This is so important, and when we have a more efficient way of keeping that pressure inside and transferring force, our sports performance movements and our power output and our force output in any functional movement is going to be enhanced and going to be improved. And the diaphragm is like any muscle. We can train it. When we build up the strength of the diaphragm, we improve its endurance capacity. And now this part of it is really important. Not only do we want to ensure that the diaphragm is strong enough to be able to draw down and push those ribs and help those ribs be pushed out to facilitate good, efficient breathing mechanics deep, low down, there's also something called blood stealing, which is a metabore reflex, which is a fancy word for saying when the body and the diaphragm starts to get tired from physical exercise, it will steal blood from your legs, from your extremities, and send blood to the diaphragm if you're starting to be inefficient with the use of it and it's starting to get tired and fatigued, because the diaphragm is the most important muscle, because without breathing, you're going to die. So the legs become less important when you start to get tired and fatigued. And blood going to your diaphragm to ensure that you maintain breathing steals blood from the legs, steals blood from the extremities. And then that's one of the reasons why you're going to feel more tired and fatigued, that sort of jelly leg feeling, as well as the accumulation of more lactate in that area because you're getting less oxygen to that area. So if we can improve the strength of the diaphragm, we improve its ability to function as a muscle, as part of the movement of breathing, the mechanics of breathing, but also importantly, we improve the endurance of it, the efficiency of it, so that we don't have to send as much oxygen there, we don't have to waste so much energy on the act of breathing. Breathing comes at an energy cost. Breathing, the diaphragm, uses energy, needs oxygen. If I can improve the strength of it, I get to improve the functional movement of it, and then I can also neglect the effect of this metabolic reflex called blood stealing. So there's some reasons why you want to train the diaphragm. Now I'm going to show you on the floor some very simple progressions on how you can set yourself up and gradually build up the strength progressively of your breathing muscles, and particularly the diaphragm. So we're going to come down onto the floor like this, knees bent, feet flat. And this is one, important for working on our alignment of the rib cage. And then two, the other thing is when you're lying down on the floor, the diaphragm can relax, your stomach muscles can relax. You don't have to posturally stabilize that midline. So if the diaphragm's got two jobs, one breathing and two stabilizing that midline and helping with postural support and lumbar support, well, lying down on the floor in this position takes away that part of its job. So the diaphragm can work purely on breathing, and it's going to be easier for you to feel that. So the starting point is alignment. We must have good rib cage alignment because your diaphragm attaches onto your rib cage. Therefore, where your rib cage is in space will dictate where your diaphragm is, and the position of your rib cage will therefore affect the function and movement of your diaphragm. So number one is getting length through the spine and creating some space between your rib cage and your pelvis. So in this position, pelvis is going to stay still. I'm going to try and lift up and walk my rib cage back a couple of millimeters or centimeters, and then relax and feel that length through the spine. Your head should feel like it's further back behind you, and you should feel like you've got some space between the bottom of your rib cage and your pelvis. And that's where the diaphragm's going to be moving down and out and expanding. Creating space there is going to allow it to do that. Next, we go further up the chain just to help open up the airway. All of our work is going to be done nasal breathing, but in terms of our head position, rather than looking directly up, we're going to look slightly back, which is going to allow you to tilt the chin slightly and keep the airway nice and open. Final bit is tongue to the roof of the mouth. You create a little bit of suction to seal the tongue at the roof of the mouth, and then you close the mouth, lips gently together. The final step for the alignment of the rib cage is just making sure the rib cage is connected down to the floor. You're going to create a tiny little posterior tuck of the pelvis, and that's going to allow the rib cage to meet the pelvis and feel the rib cage being pulled down towards the floor. You'll push through your feet slightly to make that happen, but you'll feel like the back of the ribs, those posterior ribs, really snugly connected to the floor. Your hands are going to give you some feedback, and we're just going to make sure before we add some resistance to try and strengthen this movement and these mechanics of breathing, we're going to ensure that your diaphragm is moving correctly and your rib cage is expanding out correctly. So what you're going to do is you're going to use your hands to give you some feedback. Palms are going to go on the outside of the ribs. The fingertips are going to meet somewhere in the middle, not at your belly button, below your belly button, in between your sternum and your belly button, in that space there between where those two lower ribs meet. With the rib cage actively connected to the floor, you're going to take a breath in to the face through the nose, not up your nose, because when we breathe up the nose, we just lift everything vertically. We're going to try and get everything expanding out three-dimensionally, low down. So I breathe horizontally into the face, try and track the airflow as it comes into the nose, try and follow it towards the back of the throat. As that happens, I'm actively keeping the ribcage connected to the floor with that little tuck and the ribcage pulled down. And as I breathe in, I feel my fingers getting pushed up by my diaphragm as it expands into the area below the ribcage. And then I feel my ribs pushing my hands out to the sides. And I can feel air going into the back because I can feel my back ribs gently pushing against the floor. If I've got the fingers moving up, I've got the ribs widening out to the sides, and I've got sensation of air going into the back, then I'm truly creating a three-dimensional breath, low down, that's being driven by the diaphragm. On the exhale, you're slow and cannot try and control your exhalation. Okay. Now, two things that are really important. One, that you can actually feel the diaphragm contracting, and two, make sure that we're not over breathing when we're practicing mechanics. Over breathing means breathing more than your metabolic demands. We're lying down the floor. We don't have a bit large, even a medium, we have a very small metabolic demand whilst we're lying down on the floor. You're concentrating on a lot of things, but your physical exertion is small. But in order for you to practice feeling the rib cage moving and the diaphragm moving, as well as taking that diaphragm through its full range of motion that we're going to, in a moment, strengthen it through, we're going to take the biggest breath that we can. And in order to do that and not over breathe, I want to ensure that I'm breathing as slowly as possible. So the description or the cue for you is you're going to try and take all of the air in the room and get it inside of your lungs, but do it as slowly as possible. Okay, that's the task on the inhale and slowing down the exhale. Now, in order to check, am I truly getting the diaphragm to drive this motion of breathing and to drive this deeper breath and this three-dimensional breath? The way to check if your diaphragm is the thing that you're initiating the movement from is to do what we call a blocked inhalation. So what we're going to do is we're going to breathe in and breathe out, then we're going to pinch my nose, and then I'm going to try to breathe in, and my diaphragm, underneath where my fingers here, should like pulse. I'm trying to breathe in, the diaphragm's trying to move down and flatten out, but I'm holding the breath, so it's not allowed to move anywhere, and we get this like isometric contraction. You'll feel like a pulsing underneath where those two lower ribs are. So you can try that. That's a test of, okay, yeah, that's my diaphragm. It's deep inside. It's not your abs. It's deeper than that. And then once you've got that connection, you can go back to hands on the outside of the ribs, fingers in the middle, breathe in and feel that contraction, but now the diaphragm's going to move because you're not holding the breath. Ribs going out, belly getting big, fingers moving up, feeling air going into the back. I'm still inhaling, I'm even talking, which isn't inhaling, but I am still expanding, look. As the breath gets bigger, even if as it comes into the chest is going to get wide rather than it moving up towards my head. And once I've reached that full expansion, try and squeeze at the top and you'll feel the diaphragm pushing. Try and get more air in. When you don't feel like you can get any more in, you try more. That's the diaphragm contracting at its end range. And then slowly control the exhale. And if you slowly control your exhale, you might feel a little bit out of breath at the end of the exhale. That means you're feeling a little bit of air hunger, which means you're definitely not over breathing. It means you're actually gently working on a little bit of your CO2 tolerance. You know, CO2 tolerance is for another video, but hopefully you've come across a little bit of that. But that's really important, that you feel a little bit of air hunger at the end of the exhalation. Okay, once we feel like we've got that, I've got control of that expansion, I can expand fully, I can create three-dimensional expansion. It's being driven from the diaphragm low down, and I can control that inhalation, exhalation, so I feel a little bit of air hunger. Once you've got all the mechanics and you can feel with your hands everything working correctly, our first step before we add any weight is you're going to provide resistance with your own hands. So my palms are on the outside of my ribs and my fingers are in between my sternum and my belly button in the middle. I'm actually going to push down with my fingers to restrict my diaphragm. We're going to push in with my palms on my rib cage, and I'm going to restrict myself and ensure that I have to overcome this restriction that I'm providing. How hard do you push? Well, as hard as you feel comfortable, and build yourself up progressively. Okay, so I'm pushing in with the palms, I'm pushing on the ribs, I'm pushing in with the fingers. And I take a breath in. As we did before, ribs cage stays connected to the floor. Expand three-dimensionally, filling from the bottom up. Get that full expansion, but make yourself work against that resistance that you're providing. Once you don't feel like you can breathe in anymore, try and squeeze, get a bit more in at the top, as big as you can, and then slowly control the exhale. Yeah, so you're in control of how much you push. A really nice stepping stone from passive, just trying to breathe well in this position, to actually then, before we grab a weight. But that's what's next. So I'm going to grab a dumbbell. What I really love about the dumbbell, and I've got some feedback from the professional athletes that I'm training, where rather than putting a sandbag on, which a sandbag or a big slam ball or something is more comfortable. This is going to obviously dig in a little bit, but what it does is it gives us feedback of the bottom portion moving before the top, and that's really valuable feedback. And when people are training on their own, is one of the biggest things that they've said to me, yeah, it's a little bit uncomfortable with this here, but it gives me that feedback that I know when I'm not being coached one-on-one by you, I can practice this on my own and know that I'm doing it correctly. So the dumbbell goes down here. The bottom bit underneath where those two lower ribs meet, so the diaphragm's got to directly push, and as it expands everything out, push that bottom bit up. And then the top of the dumbbell above the sternum onto the chest. Everything goes the same. Fingers can just rest now and just steady the dumbbell. Your palms can go on the ribs, and you can still push in with your palms on the ribs to provide a bit of resistance. But I breathe in and feel the bottom of the kettlebell rising, so dumbbell rising. And once it can't rise anymore, let the top one come as the chest gets big, but keep squeezing so that the bottom of the dumbbell stays high, back is still connected to the floor. At the top of the inhale, when I can't breathe in anymore, try and squeeze, get a bit more out, and slowly control the exhale. So now you have the eccentric strength to slow down the weight of the dumbbell coming down. The major thing to look out for that you don't, that's it correct, that you don't do, is people feel the bottom like this, and they see the bottom rise, and then when they feel like they can't expand here anymore, and they want to inflate into the chest goes up, and the bottom sinks down, and they rise everything up rather than expanding out and keeping the bottom up. So always trying to push the bottom of the dumbbell up towards the ceiling, and when that's going to rise and you're going to go higher up into the chest gets big, but this still stays high. You can hear in my voice, you're working hard. Your back stays connected to the floor. Don't arch the back and lose that ribcage alignment, because your ribcage alignment affects the position of your diaphragm. So I'll just go through with you one more time, right from the start. Space between the rib cage and the pelvis. So pelvis stays still, wiggle, and get that rib cage away from the pelvis. Eyes looking slightly back, so you tilt the head. Rib cage connected down to the floor with that little posterior tuck. The rib cage meets the pelvis, and you feel connected with those back ribs, those posterior ribs, down on to the floor. That all stays the same. Weight goes bottom portion of the dumbbell in between where the two lower ribs meet. The diaphragm's going to push on that. Tongue is to the roof of the mouth, sealed. You breathe into the face and you get as much of the air from the room, all of the air of the room, into your lungs, but as slowly as possible. So it should be quiet. Bottom of the rib cage, bottom of the dumbbell is going high. Once that can't go any higher, I let the chest get big, but it's widening and broadening as well as lifting up. I'm connected at the back still, look. There's no arch in the lower back. Once I can't get any more in, trying to squeeze, try to breathe in and get that diaphragm to keep pushing the bottom of the dumbbell up, and slowly control the exhale. Okay, and we're looking for 6 to 10 reps of this. Really great as an activation exercise before you go into training, or doing a couple of sets of this at the end of a training session to work on as an accessory exercise, work on the strength of your breathing muscles, your diaphragm and your intercostal. I guarantee once you've done this, you take a breath in, you're like, oh, it feels so good to be there. I really feel connected to the diaphragm. I can feel it moving. I can feel how much I can get it expanding. Take that then into your exercise, and I guarantee with a bit of time, you build up the strength for that, you build up your connection to it, you're going to be able to create more intra-abdominal pressure there, you're going to be able to transfer force better, you're going to be able to move better. it's going to feel better, you're going to be able to breathe better, and ultimately you're going to get more out of your exercise. So there we go, some simple ways that you can work on connecting to your diaphragm, getting the diaphragm and the breathing muscles strong, and I hope you're going to feel the benefits from doing that in your training. Trying to do this sort of once or twice a week is a really great starting place. As I mentioned, doing one set as part of almost like activation before you go out and do a run or before you do a strength training session. And don't forget about the importance of the alignment that we did first. Get some alignment, get some space, get the ribcage in line so that the diaphragm has a starting point that it can then move from and function correctly. Really important that our alignment and our movement of the diaphragm and the breathing muscles is good, is efficient, is in line with what we're talking about before we then go and get strong and strengthen those movement patterns. We don't want to get stronger at a slightly poor movement pattern because you're just getting better at doing something that's slightly inefficient. So work on the alignment and the awareness as well before you get to the point of working on the strength. I've done a whole podcast episode on this subject of strengthening the diaphragm. Check that out if you haven't done yet. The podcast called Between Breaths Podcast. It's on YouTube as well as on all of your favorite podcast platforms. I've got a free Foundations of Breathing course that's available at probreathwork.com as well as on the Pro Breathwork app. That's completely free. It's on Apple, it's on Android. Check that out. It's where I show you everything that I'm teaching the professional athletes that I work with, and the Foundations of Breathing course is completely free, and I can't recommend that enough to get the basics down. And for a lot of people, just those foundational basics are enough for them to make massive changes and they don't really need to do anything else. So check that out at probreathwork.com. If you haven't yet subscribed to this YouTube channel, please hit subscribe wherever that is on one of these corners. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and I look forward to replying to those. So thank you for watching. You've been breathing. I've been Jacko. Until next time, keep it nasal.